How do you approach fostering collaboration and innovation within engineering teams? And what strategies can leaders use to build a culture of that continuous learning that's so important?
I like some of the things you mentioned about continuous learning and collaboration. The term innovation is interesting because we think about innovation as invent, but there are a lot of inventions that have never been implemented. And someone I follow on LinkedIn, a former Intel employee that I connected with on LinkedIn, clarified innovation is an invention gets adopted or a new way of doing things that gets adopted. Maybe another company is doing this new review process that improves building bridges, and your company's not doing that, but you see that this could be really beneficial.
Technical skills and leadership don't always go hand in hand for AEC professionals. It's difficult. We learned technical concepts and calculations and equations in school, not how to interact with people and lead teams. Well, in today's episode, I have with me Ann Meixner. Ann is a PhD, and she's also the owner of the Engineers Daughter. And she focuses now on helping to bridge the gap between the technical education and the leadership in the corporate world. And she's really good at it. She focuses a lot on skill-based development, things like how to listen to people, give them the right feedback, and really help them to grow as AEC leaders. So in today's show, she's going to talk about some things you can do immediately in your career and share some of the stories and lessons that she's learned in her career at Intel and other areas where she really focused on technical leadership. I'm Anthony Fasano, and this is the AEC Leadership Show. Let's dive right in. I'd like to welcome my guest onto the show for today. Ann Meixner is a PhD and principal owner at the Engineers Daughter. Ann, welcome to the AEC Leadership Podcast.
I'm so happy to be here, Anthony.
We're happy to have you. So why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself? What inspired you to focus on semiconductor testing and leadership, and what motivated you to start the Engineers Daughter?
I took a break from undergraduate. I graduated and I was like, I know I can get a master's, right? And academically inclined, but I didn't know what my statement of purpose was. So I was like, let me go work for a while. And I accepted a job with IBM in Dutchess County, New York. And it turned out it exposed me to semiconductor manufacturing. But the thing I became fascinated with was defects. I went, wow, you got to detect them. Sometimes you have to live with them. You try to prevent them. It was, it just hooked me. And I feel very fortunate that at very early in my engineering career, I found something that just, what I call ignited my engineering soul. So much so that I took a 50% cut in pay to get a PhD. Now, isn't that crazy?
That is crazy, but hey, if you love something, you love it.
Right. In terms of leadership, I just seem to have gravitated to leadership roles even as a college student. I was in the engineering in the honor society. I did some things, and then I became an officer in Tau Beta Pi, the engineering honor society. Right. And that's leading. That's a co-ed leadership role.
Yeah.
Vice president for a year, president for a term. I pass it off to someone else, and so that Tau Beta Pi really does provide engineering students some glimpses into what is leadership. What are some of the things you have to do, and there are other forms of that there, and when I went to graduate school in Carnegie Mellon, I played different roles. So I think it's just, I like collaborative and community and doing things with other people. And so I think that's really sort of been my motivation and, reading along the way and things like that. So that's that part of the story.
That's great. No, that's interesting to me. And we'll get into it a little bit, but Ann also does some of these Friday ponderings or, messages that she puts out on LinkedIn that we'll talk about later, which has kind of been taken from that experience in technical plus leadership and everything that she's done. So I want to get into that in a little bit, but tell us about the Engineer's Daughter first.
Well, I got laid off and it was unexpected. And via my experienced outside Intel. In Portland, Oregon, I call it the city of the multi-gig work lifestyle, where you can get revenue streams from different areas. And so without a plan, I took a leap of faith. And I could do that because financially, I didn't have obligations like a lot of my other peers. I was a widow. I didn't have children. I didn't have a lot of people to take care of. I'm like, got a bunch of money from the layoff. I had money in the bank or stock in the bank. I'm like, I'm going to take a risk.
Let's take a shot.
And I said, I could fail, but I'm going to learn in the process. And so that's that. And I've made progress along. I'm on my 10th year, and I've made progress, and I continue to hope to gain more activities that paid.
Yeah, no, I understand. I hear you. And it's always a risk when you try something like that especially after being in maybe a corporate career for some time, where you're used to a lot of stability and a lot of routine and a lot of structure. Similar to what happened to me when I left my corporate engineering job to start what is now EMI. It can feel a little bit uncomfortable, to say the least. But your mindset was good in that I may fail, but I'm going to learn. And there's certainly been some ups and downs for me, but I've learned a tremendous amount along the way, I think, like you, and that's inspiring. And I hope that engineers out there listening that maybe have a little bit of an entrepreneurial itch at some point in their career, they can give it a shot, because it can be very rewarding.
I agree. And I found other people who are in this position, you and other people, consultants actually are fairly, my experience so far, they're generous. They'll help each other.
Yeah.
Which was illuminating to me, because in a corporate environment, sometimes there was this competition, but we work for the same company. So
right.
It's a little baffling and not intuitive.
Yeah, no, that is true. So Anne, innovation often requires kind of bridging the gap between technical experts and then leadership, like we talked about. So how do you approach fostering collaboration and innovation within engineering teams? And what strategies can leaders use to build a culture of that continuous learning that's so important?
I like some of the things you mentioned about continuous learning and collaboration. The term innovation is interesting because we think about innovation as invent, but there are a lot of inventions that have never been implemented. And someone I follow on LinkedIn, a former Intel employee that I, connected with on LinkedIn, clarified innovation is an invention gets adopted, or a new way of doing thing that gets adopted. Maybe another company is doing this new review process that improves building bridges, and your company's not doing that, but you see that this could be really beneficial, right? Here's this new idea to this company. The innovation is we're going to do something a new way. It's not necessarily patents, though in a technical role like I had at Intel, right? Patents are part of a company's, securing their IP, et cetera. So to be able to innovate in a company, you have to be able to also influence. You have to have influencing skills, right? And that comes from communication. I have a model. I have it here to remind myself, I have a model for engineering career growth. And I just like the term soft skills. I think of them as underlying skills to collaborate with other human beings. Yeah. Because they're actually very difficult.
The soft skills are the hardest to learn.
Right. So calling them hard, soft, I think is, technical skills and working with other skills. But I think of them as underlying skills. So I think one of the things when you are trying to innovate is making sure you listen to the other people you're trying to influence. What concerns them? Can you relate your idea or this new method you want to do things or this new technology to something that's painful for them, right? The concept of what are their pain points, and try to relate what you want to do to that pain point. It has to do with listening and understanding the other people, right? Relating, to that. The other part in terms of collaboration with a team, right? I led at Intel, I never was formally a manager. I was leading cross-functional, even cross-business. It was a big company. I had people in manufacturing and people in design. It was teams, working with them to take a set of technologies and implement it to have better test methods and more effective and efficient test methods. To collaborate successfully, you want to foster a team environment. Part of a team environment is making sure everyone gets heard. Actually knowing something about the other person, knowing that, he plays skee ball or you ski or you guard. They're actually having those little small personal connections reminds you that they're human beings. And you remember that people are human beings, you might be able to forgive them when they have a bad day and say something that really bugs you. And I think that's often, it's sort of underrated. People are like, oh, but we're in business. We don't, we have to stay business-like. It's like, people have lives outside of work, and it's, you could be curious. At the end of my time at Intel, when I was leading a meeting, there were always people, you don't have to start 5 minutes late because people were coming in late. So I'd use the first 5 minutes. I'd put in a question in the little net meeting or whatever I had. Oh, what did you do over the weekend? Or what was the last musical event you had? Right. And the thing is, with modern sort of community group meetings, it's like, you don't have to all talk. You can actually have people type and you can learn very quickly about each other. That's a quick tip to, like, when you're working with Paul's team, we're on Zoom calls or bridge meetings or things like that. You can ask a quick question while you're waiting for other people to find out, oh, what did you do? Did anyone hike this weekend, or did anyone do something like that? Yeah. So those are some ideas.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think the one thing that you said that I really want to reinforce to people, what you said about innovation is, it doesn't mean you're inventing something new, right? You might see another company doing something and then you can implement it in your organization. It can make a big change. So I do think that that's an important distinction, because you don't have to invent everything new. There's AI out there. There's things out there. You may need to research. You may need to find something, and you may need to bring it to the table, and then have a project, like Anne's saying, to influence enough people to get it in place in your organization. And certainly use some of those soft skills and connect with people to help make that happen. But I think the answers are out there probably in a lot of ways already. We don't need to necessarily recreate the wheel, even though we like to do that as engineers. We don't necessarily have to all the time.
I think focusing on make it happen as opposed to inventions, is we like to make things happen. I like to do things. Yeah, for sure. So, Anne, what are some of the key lessons that you've learned during your time at Intel, and how did those experiences kind of shape your approach to leadership in technical roles? One of the things, large corporations have developed technical tracks versus management tracks to be able to promote people who don't necessarily want to manage teams. I mean, manage it, don't want to go up the management ladder, which a lot of opportunities there anyhow, but to recognize that as engineers grow and experience and stuff, you want to recognize and reward that. I think the hardest thing I found in other peers that I talked to is, as you go into that role, is like, how do I find value when I'm not individually contributing to all the things? That's a psychological shift that is challenging, because how you've reviewed, I designed this circuit, or, I made sure this screw had the proper forces, I did the thermal. But to do larger projects or have a larger impact, you need to be able to, the word that I used in my model is, you need to be able to work through others, right? And so it's guiding, suggesting, hey, go in that direction, I trust you. And not being the control freak. Well, you didn't do it the way I would do it, but did they get the end result? And so it is when I developed my presentation on demystifying the corporate technical ladder, I talked to some of my peers at Intel, but a couple other people who were outside Intel that I knew through my networking. And that came up more than half the time as a challenge. Yeah. And it's because it's easy to go and you can grade yourself easily of what you do, but grading yourself as working through others is challenging. So I think that's one of the things I got I was complimented on a number of times, well, you know how to work well through others. And I think part of it was having done all that leadership in college and other things, is like you ask someone, you delegate,
Right.
and you give enough parameters, and it's like, oh, I hadn't thought about that. Or wow, you did more or something like that, and not panicking that they did it slightly different. Did it meet the objective? In engineering, there's at least 3 ways of doing something
Right.
that you
Yeah.
can utilize. And so not getting hung up on, well, they didn't do it the way I would do it. Like, that's being a control freak. You didn't like it as an engineer, don't do it to another engineer. But
Yeah.
but the challenge also is, how much guidance does someone need? And being able to check in. And I do have a story where I had a summer intern. And I said, we were trying to use some Taylor series and some multivariate analysis to understand some circuit part. And one of another engineers in our organization had this method. We went and talked to him, like, here it is. And then this engineer, Paul, called me like, Rami needs a bit more, you should check with him more often. I'm like, okay. Right. And so that was feedback from someone else saying, you're responsible and I'm sure you can do it. I'm letting you know. Right. And so it's that balance of how much direction, how much experience, is it too new to them? And I think that's where the relationship skills and understanding, checking in on things on that.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. I mean, I think that I've heard many leaders kind of frame out their leadership style as, I'm going to tell someone what I want achieved, but not exactly tell them how to do it, right? It's kind of as you're suggesting, but I think the point that you make is important as a follow-up to that is that may be fine if they know how to ultimately get to the end point. But if they don't have enough knowledge yet to do it at all, they're going to need a little more guidance. So there's always that balancing act. And I think you're right on in that your people skills, your relationship building, skills can help in that mentoring and in that guidance process to try to weigh that out. And I really like your terminology of working through people. And I think that that's a good way to phrase it, because a lot of technical professionals, I'm sure, as you know, struggle quite a bit with delegation because, we're so used to doing the technical work out of school. All of a sudden, one day we've got to give it away, and that becomes challenging. And like you said, we want to control things. And so if we can kind of maybe see the ability and the opportunity to do more if we're working through others and mentoring them and guiding them and delegating effectively, that can be a way kind of to amplify your impact, because you can only do so many things yourself, right? You can't keep taking the next position and then do the old position and the new position. It just doesn't work like that.
No, definitely. And it's a mistake a lot of engineers make in that first leap.
So based on your experience, what would you say are some of the most critical skills that engineers need to develop if they do aspire to take on leadership roles?
People talk about communication skills, and they often emphasize the telling, whether you're writing or presenting. Listening is probably the most important one. And I continue to develop myself. So I think, and also in my model I have this model under skills, and I have listen, write, and present, because I have 6. If I could fit a 7th, reading is also listening. And I actually think a lot of people read too quickly. They get the email, I'm like, I'm going to respond. And I get emails like, you didn't really understand my question, did you? Now, maybe I didn't articulate, but I thought and so to listen means you have to be able to pause, because it's also, you have to be reflecting on what is the person saying and do you understand it? The same thing with reading. And if you don't, then you ask to clarify, you go back, I'm answering this, I need a clarifying question to confirm that I have that correctly. And so I think listening is crucial to communication, but we don't talk about it enough in engineering. We sort of say, well, engineers don't know how to write, engineers don't know how to do this. And like, it's bullshit. Writing's hard for everybody. Right?
Yeah. For
right?
sure. Yeah.
It's work. The engineering curriculum doesn't, at least when I went in the early 80s, didn't have a lot of writing as part of your classwork. It happened if you took classes outside to write well. You need to read a lot to, right? You learn writing also through reading to see what, it's almost like by osmosis. Reading other technical articles, you get a sense of what is the rhythm of the language, but also what is the outline on that. But in listening, no one, one of my managers at one point said, you need to work on your listening skills. Here, go take this class. And I didn't think it was a bad listener, but it pointed out, certain things. Right now we're on a call. What if your mic is poor or there's poor audio? Well, that's the first thing that gets in the way of listening is the sound quality. I think the other thing, entitled with the listening is understanding the other person's point of view. That we always talk about there's a phrase, common phrase is, are you listening to like set up the next argument or are you listening to understand? But I recently read one of Brene Brown's book where she said, are you there to be right or get it right? And I really like that because it's a little bit more, it's a little stronger. And I think it emphasizes, as an engineer, you're solving a problem. We're there to get it right, not be right. Right. But there is sort of that tendency in engineering pride of like, well, I want to do it my way. I'm right, not you. And so as part of that listening is like, what's the objective of this conversation? What's the objective of we're trying to solve this problem collaboratively? Doesn't matter whether, and there should be enough credit to go around, right? And sometimes you get too focused on, well, who's getting credit for this?
Right.
If my name's not on it, right? If it's not my way, then how do I get credit? And so I actually I think engineer organizations should be revising how they do performance reviews. Or I've heard people try to do that. Evaluate the whole team, not the individual people on the team, because then some people have, I was what some people go, I was a connector at Intel. How do you evaluate connectors, right? If you're connecting across organizations, well, no one can quite get credit. But if you think about, when you have a team, there are people who are good about connecting. Oh, you know this, they know this, we connect you. Or you're asking the same question. And that's a lot harder for managers to evaluate the performance if you're trying to individually. But engineering is a team sport. No one does this by themselves.
Yeah, for sure.
They haven't done by themselves in 1,000 years.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, I like that a lot. And, when we do our training courses on communication, people are always, the first word that comes to mind is speaking and talking when they hear the word communication, but not a lot of people think of listening first. And it's, I always say it's a two-way street. Someone can be talking, but someone's got to be on the other end, listening, digesting the information and then acting on it, appropriately.
Right. And when you are the speaker, it's about the audience, the listener, not you.
Right.
And in my training on talks, I said the first thing is an audience profile from Nancy Dworkin's book. And I actually have that as a free little training video. Right. I'll walk through this because I think it's so important. You do that
That's
first.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And going back to what you said about, people kind of responding too quickly, maybe on an email or a message. I'm actually reading a really good book right now. It's called Slow Productivity by Cal Newport, which I'm really enjoying. And he's saying that a lot of kind of, big time authors, inventors, the reason that they were so prolific in what they did is because they didn't do too many things and they weren't under as much pressure as people today in the corporate world where we're like, respond, got a meeting,
right.
Zoom, respond. And like it chops up your day. So you don't have a lot of time for deep work.
Right. I think I started reading his book. I put it aside. Another book I like in that vein is, I can't remember the author's names, but it's Rest While You Get More Things Done When You Do Less. It is about having chunks of time.
Right.
Where you're not interrupted. So you have time to also struggle with it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. That's part of it. So, and you emphasize skill-based training and mentorship. What strategies or approaches have you found most effective in empowering kind of that next generation of engineers?
First, the reason I say skill-based is because I think anybody can learn a skill. To me, it puts aside someone's a natural writer or someone's that. Well, yeah, some people have maybe more gifted in that, it doesn't mean you can't learn anything, right? To be skilled. So I think that's why I focus on skill-based. To the point of how to go about doing that with sort of the next generation of engineers, you can say, go take this class. But once they've taken a class, say they've taken a class on how to do a better presentation, they're doing presentations, you're seeing them, the ability to give feedback to reinforce, oh, that was good. Or you might want to think about doing this differently. And my decades as a ski instructor have reinforced you don't point out what's bad first. You first point out what they did well. And then you say, here's where you could improve. And I think that's the positive reinforcement is, hey, you really rocked in this area. And then stating, here's where you might want to consider doing it differently next time. Here's why, right? What to do differently and why that may be more effective. I mean, I do that in teaching skiing, right? I had to turn off the engineering immediate criticize, finding out what's wrong as opposed to what's right. I think as a profession, we sort of zoom in and here's the gap and not here's what's doing well. But being able to not say, do it this way because that's the right way, but say, it may be more effective next time. When I tell a student in my ski classes, try this, and, I might not tell them actually how that'll change. I'll ask, well, what do you notice, right, by making that change? So I think that reinforces their own reflection on why that made more effective, and then helps instill an ability to become self-aware, on if they're developing that particular skill. Same thing with facilitating a meeting. Intel had a class on effective meetings. Intel is a meeting-heavy culture. And a bunch of my peers, the most effective class is taken, right? How do you facilitate a meeting? Right? And part of it is you don't, as a facilitator, do all those roles. But at the end of my Intel career, I was like, I'm the work group leader, but I don't necessarily have to run the meeting. How is anybody learn to run the meeting if they don't get a chance? So I would start, who wants to facilitate the reader? Who wants to facilitate? Who would like to be timekeeper? And if they didn't pick it, I'd just start naming it. So people learned, who's going to do minutes. And then you have an opportunity to give someone feedback, or at least they have to practice.
Right.
If they've seen you do it, if they've seen people facilitate, then they can also, then your role model, and then they can give it a try. And then you can give them feedback offline. If it's someone you're like, I think they're doing well. Here's something to do better. So I think part of it is mentoring at Intel in terms of those, develop others. There's just be a role model, just be visible. Yeah. And then there is, actively mentoring people to get feedback. But then there's just developing training, right? Spread, or give the training on speaking, give the training on emotional intelligence in your company because you value it, and signing up to teach is a way of mentoring, is a way of helping others grow, right? And looking at how are you helping other engineers grow? That's sort of the attitude that I have.
Yeah, I like that. And I think also when you're teaching, you're learning too. So it's a great opportunity for you.
Oh, yeah.
That's when you learn the most, probably, actually. When you're reteaching it to someone. For me, I always pick up new things and different things, and it helps me get sharper.
I totally agree with you. I guess it's what's in Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Effective People is sharpening, keep sharpening, keep honing it.
Yep.
And training others is a way to do that. I totally agree with you on that.
All right, so the last thing I want to talk to you about today, Anne, is storytelling. Storytelling seems an essential part of your work, as seen in your engineering storytelling site and your LinkedIn Friday Pondering posts. How can AEC leaders use storytelling to guide their teams?
That's a really good question. I've been thinking about that and as preparing for today's conversation, and thinking about stories I tell or stories I was tell, it's about being an authentic story. It's not about telling you, like, well, remember, Odysseus and Homer's story did this. It's, here's what I did. Here's what happened to me 10 years ago or early in my career. So or I observed so-and-so do that. So I think the most important thing is it needs to be authentic. It needs to be something either that happened to you or that you personally observed. Don't tell me what Teddy Roosevelt did, after, he lost the presidential election, right? Tell me what you did. Tell them what you did. Tell them, how to recover. So I think that's the most important aspect, is that it is something relatable, something that happened to you on that. And what's important about storytelling is we're wired to remember stories. You could tell someone, you should be kinder to people because they'll be more responsive to you at work, right? Mm-hmm. You could say, this is the rule, or this is the guidance. But if you say, well, here's how I handled or recovered from such a situation in the past, or here's, a story of working in that case.
It's tangible for them.
It's tangible. It's real. And so
right.
One of the things, when I was laid off from Intel, I became obsessed with engineering stories. Because I was looking at all these experienced engineers being asked to leave. I'm like, look at all that wisdom walking out the door. How is wisdom passed on? Through stories.
Yeah, it's true.
And so I wrote a story of rookie mistakes. Well, I call it my most embarrassing moment as an engineer, as a young engineer. I wrote stories of, why was this a sexy harbor? Why was this hard? Why was this attractive? Yeah. And so because I think it tells about what I call the everyday life of engineers, or the engineering life. The Friday ponderings that I've been writing, I forget exactly how I inspired. It was probably like conversations. And it was like, let me write about this. And it's gotten to the point where there's some snippet, some conversation or idea. And sometimes I save them for a week or two later, but it's often something that happened that week or something that came up often. And I'll just here's the prompt. And I just start writing. And I maybe do one or two revisions, and I don't even worry about the grammar and all of that. What I post up there's some grammatical errors there and that, but it's fresh. But it's also my peers on the on my network and LinkedIn. They like it. Some people really respond to, which means, oh, this really resonated. And I think it's about validating the engineering experience. Yes. And stating what is everyday engineering, right? When you read books or people talk about engineering as a discipline, there's so much focus on there's rightly so focus on what is the technical achievement that occurs, what is the technology, who helped invent this, who was involved. But there is sort of this everyday aspect, right? There is what I call the everyday craft of engineering. Yeah. That 100%. Isn't not necessarily very sexy, but it gets the job done.
Yeah, I agree with it. I mean, we just had recently an all-company meeting at EMI, and I had just gone to like a retreat the weekend before at my church, and the retreat was just people sharing their stories, and it was so powerful. And I was thinking about it afterwards, and I was thinking about the reason it was so powerful is because, just like you said, when someone shares their story, you're kind of linking up similarities of yourself with their story, and you kind of get connected with them. So you're like, wow, that's kind of like what I went through, and it becomes powerful. So I think the same thing like you're saying in leadership is, when you're trying to lead someone or mentor them or guide them and you give them instructions, it's one thing. But when you give them a story that they can connect to and really feel it, it's going to be a lot more moving and it's a lot more engaging to people than if you don't. And I think it's a good practice.
We're emotional beings first.
Yeah, exactly.
People say, oh, they're inclusive, like cognitive science. I'm a cognitive science nerd. I read those books. I eat it up. you will make a decision in a sense on emotion, and then you will justify it intellectually. You can slow that down and really step back if you are systematic and do that. But I like what you said about it's about that connection, that human connection. It's how we evolve. We're wired to remember and connect through stories.
Yeah, 100%.
And I'd like to tell people if they're interested in my Friday ponderings, I'm converting what I've written over the last 4 years on and off into a book. And I have an email list where people can sign up and sort of follow me on the journey and decide how they want to support, or if they're curious and want to know when an advanced reader copy comes out or something like that. And I'm kind of, it's a little daunting to make that a financial and time investment to work with people to actually produce. But I'm very inspired to produce a beautiful book that people could have at their desk where they're working and like, I'm stuck, or let me just flip through this. And sometimes it validates what they're experiencing.
That's great. That's great. So where will people be able to sign up for this? Is that on your main website?
I have a landing page for people to sign up on that. I haven't made that that connection yet.
So we'll share Anne's information in the show notes for this episode, so you'll be able to get to that and easily, sign up for that. You can also find her on LinkedIn. We'll put her LinkedIn profile in the show notes as well. You can also go to her main website, AnneMeixner.com, which is ANNEMEIXNER.com. And learn about her there as well. So we'll make sure that you can connect with Anne. Her Friday ponderings are great. I've read many of them on LinkedIn, and she also sent me some, which were really awesome. They really do capture kind of the everyday engineering things that happen in our careers, which I think is why people connect with them. And we're excited to definitely see and share her book as it comes out. So, Anne, it was a pleasure to finally get to talk to you. We've been connected for years, and I appreciate you coming on and spending some time with us here on the AEC Leadership Podcast.
Well, Anthony, I really appreciate the opportunity. It's been an enjoyable conversation. You and I have similar passions to pass on or motivate engineers to be their best in their career.
And I can't wait for the book, and we'll be the first to share it. And we're going to keep in touch with you so we can get that information to our listeners here.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Anne. She's really interesting. I've been reading her Friday ponderings on LinkedIn for a long time, and it was great to connect with her. She does share a lot of really powerful and moving stories to help AEC technical professionals become better leaders. And if you like the video, please subscribe to our channel here. We put out videos like this on a weekly basis to help engineers become better managers and leaders. I'll see you next week.